So it's with great pleasure that I welcome you now to speak to the gathering, Tom Joyner.
Thanks very much, Dick. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I didn't know how you get the pension scheme into that introduction. Obviously, when some of us come to retire, when the mandatory retirement age is about 95, we'll be really glad that we're members of the RPS. Thanks very much for the introduction. And thank you also to Modern Railways for arranging this morning which Chris Green chaired for us. Chris, one of the things that I forgot to talk to you about earlier was to express my surprise that you'd again signed up for your policy of always making sure that you travel past on any of our services that are delayed for over 3 hours. Obviously, let me again formally apologise for the 4 hours that you spent in Watford tunnels the other night. But your feedback, as ever, is very much appreciated. Now, it could be said that the railway has got no shortage of award ceremonies, and our more cynical colleagues, although as I look out I can't see any of them here tonight, we've got the very positive cream of the railway crop. Our more cynical colleagues might suggest that they're just another backslapping ceremony. But I'll tell you why I like the Golden Whistles, because the awards tend to be about the impact on the most important part of our railway, our passengers and our customers. So congratulations in advance to everyone who's been nominated and won awards here today. You made a difference to our industry and to our passengers. Thank you. What to talk about this afternoon? There's been a lot said on industry structure in recent weeks and months, and whether we have it right or wrong, particularly given the issues that we're all facing with the delay associated with the CP5 infrastructure improvement plan. Now, I was thinking on this a couple of days ago, and it reminded me of something that happened just after I'd started in our industry back in the early 90s as a trainman at Scarborough. I was spare in the mess room one extremely cold winter's evening, and the heating had failed, unusually. And I was surprised to see the much revered elderly supervisor walk in, doing his rounds. He took pity on me, shivering, and he invited me into his office to warm up. So I abandoned my copy of Modern Railways and went with him to get warm. Now that was easily achieved, because his office was in fact hotter than the sun. No wonder BR could sometimes be perceived as slightly inefficient, as anyone, passenger or staff member, who ever ventured into a supervisor's office could only conclude that there was an instruction direct from the board that all fires must be placed on max DEFCON 1 setting at all times. As a young recruit, I was surprised that this applied to the summer months as well. I very clearly remember a balmy July day in Bridlington when I entered the supervisor's office to find with surprise the coal fire being actively stoked by the two supervisors on duty, so that the fire closely resembled a blast furnace. I think that the summer heating policy at Brid had a little bit to do with solidarity with the miners, but probably more to do with one of those side effects of a hot room, namely being to induce some staff to drift off into a deep slumber more quickly. Anyway, I was allowed into this hallowed supervisor's office to stop me shivering on that freezing night in Scarborough, and after 5 minutes or so, a driver from Leeds came in to report an issue with a train he just brought in from York. He reported the fault and then proceeded to launch into what was a tried and tested attack on British Rail and everything that was wrong with it, and how things had been so much better in the glory days of the 1970s. Now, like sometimes occurs with a number, maybe just a small number, of my fellow colleagues from the West Riding, he said his piece, and without waiting for a response that would in any way deviate from his firm view, he turned left and cleared off back to Leeds. Eric Daniel, the Scarborough supervisor, said something to me and it stayed with me. He said when he joined our railway in the late 1940s, some railwomen were moaning and talking about how good things were before the war. And then in the 60s and 70s, people were moaning about British Rail and remembering with fondness the London and North Eastern. And then he said, now, you heard that driver looking back to the 70s, and I tell you now, young Tom, that in 20 years' time, If we ever do get privatised, there'll be people looking back in the next century and saying how great British Rail were. But I tell thee, it's all about the passenger. And as I say, I think that has stayed with me. Structure and the way that we're structured can assist. But like we see today with the awards, the real difference is all about the people that we work with and the customers that we work for. Running the department within operations, like we all do, running a train operating company is tough, hard, rewarding work. It's a real challenge that requires strong leadership in a transparent environment where if we get things wrong, the customer feels it instantly. But operators sometimes think maybe too much about the here and now, because an operational strategy must be a core part of thinking in the future. So I'm going to ask you to consider taking away 3 things that I'm concerned about in the future, where we need to use our collective effort more so that the customer gets put first. I want to start by talking about train crew. Apart from talking about train crew being a railway hobby for many, it's an area that I've got a bit of experience in, and I have been brought into a number of roles with the task of restoring operational stability against the backdrop of a difficult train crew environment. Our train crew are some of our most experienced colleagues in the industry, and in many cases some of our most committed. That hints at the first issue that we as an industry have more than recognised the age profile of our train drivers. And driver policy is one area where structure has not helped us in the past. Going back a decade, I was in charge of operations for West Anglia when we split the company, split Wagon and split Cambridge Depot, with about 30 or so heading to the GN and the remaining 80 keeping with the Heron Line and what was to become One Railway, now Greater Anglia. What happened next when we split the depot? It was that all the senior drivers opted to stay with what was perceived as the better work, and opted for the GN, leaving the junior drivers and a vacancy gap on the West Anglia side. One outcome that we'd probably missed, therefore, in this remapping was that when I had 15 instructors at that whole depot, I now had 12 of them at the new Great Northern Depot for a depot of about 30 people. And the one depot, the West Anglia side, had 80 people with 2 instructors. You fast forward to another remapping, this time on the Midland, with exactly the same thing happening at Birmingham New Street Depot, with a significant majority of senior drivers opting to the cross-country link, and with it a large proportion of the driver instructors. So you've got a perfect storm situation there that we've created. We've created one depot at New Street that needs drivers and has vacancies but has very few instructors. And another link, which doesn't need to train its own drivers, has the bulk of the experience and lots of instructors. Now, looking back at these things, there's things we could have done to mitigate: trading agreements, other training methods, and I'm not looking for excuses. And in the greatest of railway traditions, we are where we are. But at some point there was a lack of operational insight that failed to foresee a problem that has recurred on a number of occasions. And with the backdrop I talked about earlier with the retirement profile, it's going to be more of a problem. And it also creates negative industrial relations pressure, which can sometimes then lead to a situation where it adds to this perception, which is not always a true perception, that TOCs get picked off against each other in terms of pay deals. We therefore have the not ideal situation where in the last few years, the TOCs with the most capacity to train, the intercity TOCs, do almost none, and the TOCs with the least capacity in terms of senior instructors and the most vacancies are pushed to train continually. It's not optimum, and it needs to change. Now, that is by no means a criticism of my intercity colleagues, or vice versa. It's something that I'm pleased to say we've had constructive and meaningful discussions at Operations Council very recently, where we looked at the need to make more progress. There is linkage, however, between being in that weaker operational position I've described and the way in which we work with trade unions. My team's work in the last 3 years at London Midland has been very much about continually delivering better operational stability and performance and improving customer satisfaction as a result. And as we've done that at London Midland, we have, by design, put ourselves in a far stronger position with the trade unions so that we can have far more constructive discussions about items of importance. I was catching up on my reading last week. You may be like me, with magazines backlogged for you to read. Or maybe that's just me who has that. But anyway, the leader comment in a weekly news magazine started, "Treatment for that once virulent condition, the British disease of strikes, has largely been successful." The number of working days lost to industrial action for the first 10 months of last year was the second lowest since records began. In the 1970s and early 1980s, it was miners, steel workers, railwaymen, binmen and British Leyland car workers who earned the worst reputations for train union militancy. Striking was almost entirely associated with blue-collar workers. Now things couldn't be more different. Of the above groups, only railway workers retain a reputation for industrial action, and almost all strikes are carried out by privileged white-collar public sector staff. Now, that is the widely held perception of our industry, and in statistics in terms of days lost, you could say that it's borne out those perceptions may be true. What do we do about it? Do we need to do anything about it? Well, the trade unions themselves would say that a breakdown in industrial relations that leads to a strike action comes about when both sides have failed. And I think we all know that strikes are never positive. The best way forward for us as an industry is to set the strategy that has the customer at its heart, as RDG and the TOCs are working to achieve with DFT, and then work out how we involve the unions in that. Our driver training, which now takes far longer than that for a commercial pilot, needs to be the safest and best, as well as being efficient. So in addition to resolving the way we ensure as a network we have more than adequate driver resource, we need to improve the driver course. RSSB have done a lot of very good work on a modular course, a high quality modular approach, and I urge everyone to get more involved than we all have been in the past, because the depot split trap I mentioned earlier was spottable, but we didn't spot it or shout loud enough to stop it. I think we've got a responsibility to our customers to make sure that we don't have unnecessary cancellations caused by a lack of available train crew. Second theme for me, making the most of technology. Colleagues who were here this morning heard the presentation on ETCS and traffic management, the core of the digital railway, and this is a big challenge. And I remain passionate that we get the best out of these great products, these potentially great projects. Network Rail have very wisely pushed out horizons on the ETCS front. There are times when it's right to take stock, and the new digital railway approach has done that. Well done to Network Rail for leading us in that way. But we now need to get the business case right for post-CP6 ETCS applications, which require us to be clear in our minds as operators about what we want ETCS to do for us. Linking back to what I was talking about with train crew and driver training, I've got it very clear in my mind we want ETCS to create an operation which is extremely safe, where we maximise performance, which we can do by removing the need for speed restrictions or operational restrictions that are caused by us being reliant on the driver having sole responsibility for retaining route knowledge and manually sighting signals, level crossings and other hazards. Now, of course, we need to be malleable ourselves and be prepared to change some of our more outdated and eccentric rulebook and operational practices to make sure that we don't add unnecessary cost to, by asking the suppliers to tailor their products in too many ways. On the traffic management front, we have to have the business case include what the impact on our customers' PPM would be if we didn't include train crew diagrams and stock workings in the industry product. I think we need to engage far more in this technology debate. Those who are here this morning, as I said, please engage with Phil Barrett, the ATOC team, the digital railway team. They need our support and help. And I know it's easy sometimes for everyone to say, yeah, ETCS, all very important, but actually I've got a job to do here and now. But as those who have knocked about for a bit will tell you, 10 years comes around before you know it. Now's the time to engage, I would suggest. Moving on, it's been a good week, I think, for the industry. Certainly a week we at London Midland are really happy. We've seen continual improvement on our NPS scores, and it was great to hear what the Minister said about the demise of the orange railway ticket. We need that network solution to future ticketing that thinks foremost about ease of use for the customer. I must mention the C2C auto refund, which I first heard Julian talk about a year or so ago. It's simple but also mind-blowing in the way that it puts the customer first. To have a smart card solution that auto credits for delays sets a new expectation. It's great and I wish them lots of success with it. The news of a smart ticketing solution that's going to be simple and easy to use is something that I think we also need to think about when we design our stations and the way we operate our stations. Now, for the three companies that are based in the second city, which is Birmingham, of course, not Manchester, it is fair to say that we're enjoying the new Street. It is such an improvement from the old New Street, and we're really proud of the many positives. Of course, if one was to be a cynic, and we've established that there's none of those in this room, but if one were to be a cynic, then you could suggest that for the first 10 times you visit Birmingham New Street, you've got little chance of actually finding any of the platforms or catching any of the trains. However, the coffees are superior, and there are a number of concessions where you can buy a replica of a train. So you can imagine what your journey would be as you enjoy your special coffee. Joking aside, New Street is a brilliant place. Please come and see it if you haven't been to Brum recently. It is breathtaking. And we've got plans in place to sort out the little wayfinding issues that there are there. We're working with Network Rail very clearly to sort those out. So maybe we've come a long way. You've got some fantastic stations, New Street, St Pancras, they're brilliant. King's Cross also. But I think there is a point that it would be good for all of us who manage stations to take forward, namely that a railway station's primary purpose is to allow our customers to catch trains. They should be open and clear places where information is clearly available, customers feel confident, and they know what they're looking for and what they're looking at. It's the primary function of a station. After that, they want to relax, and that's where the important other areas of the station come in. It's important to our customers, so it should be important to us. And it also needs to be about how the station operates. Is the station and the way the teams work conducive to making quick decisions about the other thing that's really important for customers, which is recovering the service when we have disruption? One of the first things I did when I went to London Midland was commission some work that looked at the amount of time it takes from when a controller has the idea in his brain that he is going to reform a train, step up a member of train crew, and the length of time it takes to communicate that to all the train crew concerned and the dispatcher. 12 minutes, very regrettably, was the answer. But the answer is the answer. That's a number that's fundamental for us to understand at all stations. Because what it should do is it should drive you to not take any decisions that are less than 12 minutes away, or understanding that if you do, and you have to, then you need to mitigate the customer confusion and disruption that will occur as a result of that. We've improved massively at New Street, but we have a lot to do at Euston in this regard. That's the big challenge for my team this year, and I would be, as ever, always interested in any candid and robust feedback about how you find Euston, particularly in the next coming months when we implement some changes there. As operators, though, we should challenge ourselves at the start of network or station change as to whether we are designing our stations and our station teams with the customer in mind. So to conclude, 3 things to try and remember as you leave, if you wish to: train crew, technology and stations, all with the customer at the heart of them. Thanks very much.